Hey there, it's Lenny Magill with the GlockStore Performance and Custom Shop right here in the Nashville studios today. Back from San Diego, where gas was $6.75 a gallon at some of the stations. It was pretty crazy. So it's nice to be back in Nashville, where it's a little bit more America. That said, today I'm going to introduce to you the new Gen 2 Pyramid Trigger. Not to be confused with the Gen 1. That was the original trigger. Now, the original trigger we sold a bunch of. It's been a very popular item, but we've improved it. Here in Nashville, I've got better equipment, I've got better people, and we put our heads to this about a year and a half ago when COVID was really starting to happen, and we had some time and we started looking at it. We thought, I said, you know what, I want to make a pyramid trigger that is non-adjustable or fixed so that you don't have to mess around with the adjustment screws for the pre-travel or the over-travel. And I want it to be just as good as the original pyramid trigger. In fact, I want it to be better. In fact, this is better. I'm not even joking. The Pyramid True Trigger is going to be huge because it is so good, and all you have to do is drop it in. We do sell it in 3 different configurations. So there's a basic, an advanced, and an ultimate. And the goal here is to show you how to install it and then also demonstrate to you that it will give you a better trigger using this deadweight trigger weight. So that said, again, this is all about this new Gen 2 Pyramid Trigger. I think we've kind of hit it out of the ballpark. This thing is awesome, and you'll see here in just a couple minutes. So first thing we're going to do is take a Glock 17 Gen 3, just a standard 17 Gen 3. And as I pull it out of the box, I'm going to drop the magazine, make sure the magazine's unloaded. Yes, okay. Now let's go ahead and look inside the chamber, and it is in fact unloaded. Now I'm going to pull the trigger in a safe direction. So now I've got an unloaded gun and I can kind of work on it. I will remind you whenever I do these videos or whenever I work on a gun, I separate the ammo from the table. I don't even have any ammo in this room, to be honest, but I certainly don't want to have it close by because it's way too easy to load, rack, and shoot and go bang when you don't want to. So be very aware of always working on an empty gun, keeping the gun pointed in a safe direction. Now, the first objective on the pyramid trigger install is to remove the upper or the slide. And that's done very simply by taking your hand and rotating it upwards just a little bit. And then pull back, again, just a little bit, to relieve the pressure of the slide on the slide lock, also known as a takedown device. And it's on both sides, and it's spring activated. So I'm going to pull it down on both sides and hold it down. And as I hold it down, I'm going to let the slide go forward, and I'm going to maintain the slide so it doesn't fall off and slide forward and hit the table or the floor, and then it could potentially dent or crack the nose ring, which is a very sensitive area of the Glock. And you can see there's a lot of weight. If it hits there, it could really damage it. And if you damage that, you basically need a new slide because it's almost impossible to get it back to normal. So here's the upper, here's the lower. We're going to work with the lower exclusively in this demonstration. And I'm going to use my Armorer's duct tape to work with to pull the pins out. Now, this is a brand new gun. And you'll find that sometimes the pins are a little tight, especially the trigger pin. So there's, on the Gen 3 guns, there are 3 pins, Gen 3 and Gen 4. Trigger pin, locking block pin, and the trigger housing pin. On the Gen 5 guns, they don't have a locking block pin, but the process for removing is the same. And what we're going to demonstrate is that in order to get that out the first time, you want to play with or jiggle the slide stop, because the slide stop has a spring on it that puts some pressure on that pin, and it kind of locks the slide stop into the pin. That spring pushes down into a groove in the pin, and that really kind of captures it. So the trick to this, instead of sitting there and pounding on it, is to actually jiggle this back and forth, not necessarily up and down, but also back and forth, because you're looking for to relieve some of the pressure of the spring that is pushing down into that groove that is capturing that slide stop. And I'll go ahead and show you that. So first I want to go ahead and remove the actual locking block pin. I'm going to put my punch, a 3/32 inch punch, right on top of that. And I can actually push it down, or I can take a little hammer and just tap it out. And then the thing I like about the donut is that it will capture your springs or your pins and just keep them there so they don't disappear, because they're pretty small and they're black, so if it falls into your shag carpet, you'll never find it. All right, now, trigger pin. Again, I said sometimes this is tough. I can sit there and beat on it for a while, and all I'm going to do is bend the slide stop. So what I'm going to do, here's a technique I've learned over the years. So I'm going to grab the slide stop and kind of jiggle it, like I said, back and forth. I'm going to take my punch and put it right on top of that trigger pin, and then I'm going to kind of lean forward on it. And there it comes, just like that. So I put a lot of body weight on it, and you can see that it jumped out. And now I'll go ahead and I'll pull out the slide stop. And this is the spring I was talking about. And this is the pin, and this is the groove I was talking about. If you're going to hear it nice and close, you'll see those grooves. So what happens is the pin gets captured into one of those, into that groove by the slide stop with the pressure of the spring coming down on it. So what happens is, by jiggling it a little bit, I can find a sweet spot where it's not captured and it will slide right out easily. All right, so I'm going to put all those parts away there. I'm going to take out now the the trigger housing pin, which is in the very back here. And again, I can just do this with my body weight, typically. And there it goes, and it's all captured in there. Okay, so there's the frame, and it's got everything basically ready to be taken out. All the pins are out there. So I'm going to go ahead and now take my punch and just work out the locking block itself. And then I'll go ahead and pull up the entire trigger housing and trigger bar mechanism. There you go. All right, now, the Gen 3, Gen 4 have a different system than the Gen 5 for holding the trigger bar with the trigger pin, but basically the same in the sense that it does allow the trigger to reset itself, and that's what the spring does. If you can see the motion there, I'll take it on this side so you can see it better. This is basically what's happening. It's resetting itself. And you'll also notice how the trigger bar is intersecting with the connector. And that's what makes the trigger bar fall off of the firing pin. So the firing pin basically living here in your slide, that lug intersects with the trigger bar, and as you pull back, it springs forward. Once the trigger bar falls off, as it intersects with the connector. Pretty simple system, pretty amazing to be quite honest. But it's a striker-fired gun, and it works great. I mean, everybody knows that Glock is all about reliability. It just shoots every time. Okay, so now for the Gen 3 guns, and also almost basically for the Gen 5 as well, Gen 3, Gen 4, we're going to pull forward and then twist to pull the trigger bar out. And that's how it intersects. Now, the Gen 5 guns they don't have this little piece that comes down here on the trigger bar. It actually is a straight piece, and it has a little stirrup inside, and the spring is captured on a guide rod of sorts inside the trigger housing. So then you just put the front of the trigger bar cruciform into the stirrup and capture it that way. This one in particular, Gen 3, Gen 4 guns have this this spring mechanism. It's a coil spring, and I do want you to just notice as I look at it from my perspective, the coil spring goes an S shape in a sense. So that's how you want it to be. And to take the trigger bar off here, I'm going to go ahead and just twist it and pull it out just like that. And there's the trigger bar. There's the factory trigger bar. Now, when you get the Gen 2 Pyramid Trigger, you're going to receive, depending upon which option you get, the trigger bar with our aluminum trigger versus the plastic trigger. Now, the aluminum trigger is much better than the plastic trigger in many ways, not only because it's aluminum, but it's shaped better. The safety is much more comfortable on your finger and much bigger than you can see here with the factory trigger. So if you can look in there, you can see obviously we've got a red safety, black and red here. This one is the factory trigger. The feel on your finger is so much better, especially when you shoot a lot, than the factory trigger. I just have to be honest right away. That's the one thing about the factory trigger. the actual feel of it is, pretty weak. Also, because it's plastic, it has a little bit of play to it, a little sponginess to it, whereas this one is much more crisp, this being the factory, or the Gen 2 Pyramid Trigger. So we feel that this alone is a huge improvement by itself. But you also notice that the bar itself is actually coated in titanium nitride. Now, titanium nitride is has a very low coefficient of friction, meaning that it's basically very slippery. Because there's a lot of interaction of this trigger on metal-to-metal parts, that allows it to operate smoothly, better than, say, the factory. Now, you can polish the factory one and get it to be nice and shiny, and it will work better. I got to be honest. You could actually get in there with some jeweler's polish and a Dremel tool and make this thing shiny and bright, and it will be better than the standard factory trigger. But the titanium nitride is an upgrade. The TIN, they call it, titanium nitride, is truly an upgrade, and it works so much better. The other thing we've done is we've kind of modified the way the trigger bar interacts with the shoe to give you a better trigger pull, and you're going to see that very shortly here. So here's all the pieces and parts. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to put all these aside and reassemble and show you what I'm talking about. Now, if you bought the basic trigger, you have just basically get the trigger bar itself. If you get the next one up, you're going to get the 3.5 pound connector, but I'm going to do that later. So here's the factory connector. And here's the trigger bar. And we're going to pop this on here. Now, the factory weight of the trigger is about 5.5 pounds. And I measured it before I started, so, but that's what they say, and that's what it is, 5.5, 6 pounds. When you put the spring on to the trigger, you just have to do the exact opposite. You've got to pull it in there, twist it, and then seat it. And it should live like that. Now, this alone, when I put this back in, is going to take us down to about 4.5 pounds. All right, so we're going to get a full 1 pound off of the factory trigger based upon the bar by itself. So now to go ahead and reinstall this, I'm going to go ahead and just pop the trigger housing down into the spot, make sure the trigger itself finds it, the trigger shoe finds a home. And as I push it down, I'll just make sure it's seated. I look inside, I can see all my holes are lined up. First thing I'll do is also put the trigger locking block back in. And now here's something really important when you're installing the Glock Gen 3, Gen 4. You always want to make sure that the the locking block pin goes in first. All right, so we're going to stick this in, and there's a reason, because we want to make sure that the slide stop spring is captured underneath this pin. So I'm going to take my little hammer, and this is, we sell this as a set with all the punches as well, but I like this hammer because it's got this nylon tip on it, and just tap my pin back in. And I can take my punch and kind of true it up just a little bit, just so that it's even up on either side. Let me stick it down there, and there we go. Now it's even up on both sides. Now, so next comes the actual slide stop. I'm going to just stick it straight in there, and I'm going to make sure the holes line up. And if you have any issue with the holes line up, just put your punch in there and kind of get it all cleared up. Looks good. Now, I do typically like to keep my thumb on top of the slide stop as I put the trigger pin in. And I'll push it in there, and then we'll go back here, and there you go. Now, here's something very interesting. So the trigger pin is flush on this side and not quite flush on this side, but I'm going to use my punch and I'm going to push it in a little bit, and you may hear, sometimes we hear the actual spring push down the slide stop where it will actually engage the groove that we talked about earlier. So watch this. Let's see if we can hear that little click. There it was right there. So now I know that the pin is in the proper place. The slide stop has the spring action I'm looking for, and it's all ready to go. Last pin we're going to do is our trigger housing pin. And again, using my nylon mallet there, I can get in pretty close with this thing. And I'm just going to push that down to make sure it's screwed up on both sides. And there we go, looking good. Okay, now I'm going to tell you right now, the trigger alone just feels so much better on your finger. That alone is just amazing. Not to mention the fact that we can actually give you different colors. Okay, so now it's basically done. That's how easy it is, okay? So we're going to go ahead now and a couple things you'll notice right away is it's got a shorter pull, which is by design, and it's got a little quicker reset right there. But we can make all that even a little bit better. I tell you what, right there alone just feels good, just with the trigger bar itself. Now, here's our dead weight trigger weight. And I love this thing because it's kind of the old school way to do this. The ones with the trigger weights with the springs just never really seem to be too accurate because I get a different reading every time. I'll set it to 5 pounds right now. And it's not going to go, I'm pretty sure. Let's see if I can get that trigger. There we go. Oops. Yeah. Okay. Let's go here like this. I'll take these guys off here. So it's 2 on the bottom. And here's 4.5. And this is where I think it's going to break if I do this right. Almost. A little bit more. There, it's right there. So it's right there between 4.5 and 5. I'll do it one more time at 5. Whoops. Yep, almost. It wants to do it, but it's not going to do a 5. There it is. So it's right there between 4 and 5, 4.5 and 5. With a little bit of shooting, it will definitely loosen up a little bit. One more time here. See if I can get this. Let's go right at 5 here. It's tight. It's close. It wants to, but it's. I'd say again, I can almost do the same thing with 4.5. But now, we're going to take it one step further. So I've got all factory parts in there except for the trigger bar itself. Now we're going to take it apart and we're going to add the 3.5 pound connector and some of the other pieces that will give us even a lighter and crisper trigger pull. Okay, let's see. First go here. Okay, we're back now, right there, this spot. Take our trigger, I can actually leave the trigger on the spring. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the factory connector and add our double diamond 3.5 pound connector. And we sell a ton of these. I've been selling these for 25, 30 years now. It's probably one of the most popular items we sell. It's low cost, but it makes a huge difference in the trigger pull. And it is part of the advanced pyramid trigger system. Okay, that would be the connector. And now to take out the factory connector, we come around the back side here. We can use the same punch and we can get it started to come out with a punch. And this is always a little tricky because you have to get to a point where you're not going to intersect with it. Okay, come on now. There we go. So I got it started and I can pull it out with my fingernails. And they are tight by design. So there's the factory, and there's the double diamond. And there's a very slight difference in the geometry of the one piece. Now to pop it in, you're going to notice there's a little channel here in the trigger housing. It just wants to fit right there. So we're going to go ahead and drop our pyramid trigger into that spot and push it all the way in. Make sure it's well seated and looking good. And now we're going to drop our trigger bar back into the trigger housing. I got a little twisted there. There we go. All right, now before I go too much further, I want to show you a little trick here. This is one of the, I guess they'd say the oil points that Glock recommends is right here where the trigger bar intersects with the connector, right at this spot right here. Let me show you real quick here. So right here, you'll see there's some motion back and forth here as this works. It goes back and forth and it hits that ledge there. So you can, without even disassembling the gun, just put a little drop of oil underneath the ear and it will migrate itself down. Or while the gun's disassembled, you can put some underneath the whole ledge there as well. And that's just a little bit. Now I like this little gun butter thing that we sell because it's got this needle point adapter, or should I say applicator, that makes it a lot easier to apply the oil, just like so. All right, so that's pretty cool. Now I've got some oil in there, and that's all I'm going to do is just drop the connector in, and we've got a couple other things we'll do next time to even get it to be lighter. Now with the connector, it should go down at least another ½ pound. That's what we're anticipating. Okay, we'll put this back together, and here we go. Okay. Okay, so here we are back now with the trigger bar and the 3½ pound connector. Oh, I can feel it is lighter already. Very good. Okay, so here's the 5 pound weight. And it goes just like that. That quick, I figured it would. One more time. Okay, so I'll take the 3 off the bottom. This is 2 as it sits. And I'm gonna go down here, 3 and 4. All right, so we're at 4 pounds now, and it should be right in this ballpark. Almost. It's gonna be 4½ more than likely. Yeah, there it is right there. So it's just between 4 and 4½. I'd say it's closer to 4½ than it is to 4. But that was just with the connector. I don't have a ¼ pound weight with this option, but it would probably be right there between 4 1/4 and 4½. Yeah, so there it is. So we've taken the trigger down a full pound with the trigger and the connector. 1 1/4 say. But I will say that it is much sweeter. And the reset is so much crisper right there. But there's more we can do. All right? And I'll show you the next step here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back in and we're going to install the titanium nitride coated skeletonized striker, as well as the titanium nitride coated safety plunger, which is actually shaped a little bit better than the factory, a little rounder, so it has less friction to it. And then we're also going to drop in some of our springs, which are going to make this thing even lighter. And what we'll do in the springs is I've got a trigger spring, which is extra weight, and that returns the trigger faster. I've also got a variety of different striker springs and a safety plunger spring right in here that's actually a little bit lighter too. So I think I'm going to opt right now for the 3 pound striker spring, and I'll put in the trigger spring, that's a return spring, and also the safety plunger spring. So all that said, let's go ahead and take this thing apart one more time. And then we're going to go ahead and also take apart the slide as well. So here we go. All right, so we're going to be working now with the upper or slide. And like I said, what we're going to be replacing will be the safety plunger, which lives right here, and the striker, which lives right here. Okay, and then also we're going to put some new springs in there for both the trigger return spring as well as the safety plunger spring as well as the striker spring. So it's a little bit of work here, but here's the first step. We're going to go and take the barrel out. We'll take our guide rod just by compressing it a little bit with our thumb and pulling it straight out, lifting the barrel straight out. Voila, they can go over here. And now, a lot of people have trouble taking off the slide cover plate, but there's a secret. Just like everything else, if you do it right, using a punch, even a ballpoint pen, you can lift up the striker a little bit to gain access to the spacer sleeve. And it's a plastic piece right here, and it's spring loaded. You can see it has a little bit of spring action to it. That spring is pushing up on the back side of that slide cover plate. If you don't release the spring pressure, it's very difficult to take that off. And I'll show you why once I take it off. So I'm going to push down on the spring with my punch, and then I'm just going to thumb the slide cover plate off. And I usually capture the pieces and parts so they don't spring and fly across the room. If you notice the back side of this slide cover plate, it's got a little circle cut out, and that mirrors the spacer sleeve that's on the striker. And so that spacer sleeve kind of nestles itself into that cutout spot, and that's why it's hard to take off unless you take the pressure off of the striker. So that's kind of how it works. So you're taking the pressure off, that allows you to thumb that off. Otherwise, it's captured in there by the spring pressure of the striker. So what we have here is a couple of different pieces. You've got the striker itself, which comes out as an assembly. And so there's the striker, the firing pin. It has a spacer sleeve, the firing pin itself, the spring, and the spring cups. So really there's 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. Spring cups actually has 2, so there's really 5 pieces right here. That's the assembly, the firing pin assembly. The other piece we're going to take out would be the EDP, or the extractor depressor plunger. And it actually depresses onto the extractor. It has a spring, and there's really 3 parts here. The actual rod itself, the metal rod that goes down and intersects with the extractor. The spring, which gives it a spring pressure, and this is the plastic bearing, they call it. Now, they're different colors. 9mm is always going to be black. So that's pretty cool. So this one I'm going to keep intact because I do need to take the extractor out. Now, the extractor is the claw that grabs hold of the spent casing and ejects it. And it gets ejected onto by the ejector, which is part of the trigger housing. That's the metal ejector. So there's an extractor, and the ejector throws it out the ejection port of the slide. Again, kind of like a really simple mechanism. It's like, wow, I get it. Okay, so it grabs hold of it, brings it back, actually hits the ejector, and boom, flies it out. And then it loads another round. Pretty fascinating. Okay, so let's go and take the safety plunger out. Now, the safety plunger has some really important things that it does. It prevents the firing pin from going forward unless it is depressed. And the only way it gets depressed is when you pull the trigger. And when you pull the trigger, the bird's eye of the trigger bar intersects with that and depresses it. That allows the striker to move forward. If you don't pull the trigger, the striker can't go forward. It's a safety mechanism. That's why it's called the safety plunger. So to take it out, we've got, it captures itself. This is, again, a really amazing and simple system. It's captured in the slide by the extractor, and the extractor is captured by the safety plunger. So they work in tandem with one another. So in order to take the extractor out, I just have to depress the safety plunger, and the extractor is just going to fall. Just like that. And there's the extractor. And again, this is a really amazing little piece. And if you think about it, you know, it's got all kinds of, you know, cuts and turns and all kinds of things happening there, but it's designed to grab the case as it goes forward and yank it out so that it's ejected out the port. Now, once that's out, the safety plunger will basically fall out by itself too, or sometimes it sticks, but it fall out today. And there's the safety plunger. And it basically comes with the spring captured. That spring will come out, but they've got it designed so that it actually goes in there. You kind of twist it in and it kind of catches itself. So there's the safety plunger factory. There's the factory striker assembly or firing pin assembly. We're going to go ahead now take the pyramid trigger, skeletonized and coated in titanium nitride striker, and replace it with these parts. So we're going to migrate these parts over to here. We're also going to take this safety plunger, and let me show you the difference here and why these are better. This safety plunger versus the factory, you'll see that the head is shaped a little bit better so that when the trigger bar rolls over, it doesn't have as much friction, which in turn reduces trigger pull. And if you have a lighter, shorter trigger pull, you will be more accurate and you'll be safer because you are able to place your shots where you want them to go. You're not yanking on the trigger, and by yanking on the trigger, you're disturbing the sight picture and your shots are not going where they're supposed to be going. So that's why all these things together give you a better trigger pull and make you a better shooter because you don't have to yank on the trigger as much. You've got to be, all the safety stuff comes into play as far as your ability to keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot, until you've identified your target and all that other stuff. But when you actually go to pull the trigger, it's a better experience because you don't have to squeeze on it so hard. And it's not necessarily the first shot, it's really that third or second or third or fourth or fifth shot that when you're shooting, that's when the trigger starts, people start to yank on the trigger, the rounds go everywhere. This allows you to have more control of the gun. So let's go ahead now, and I'm going to pull out, first and foremost, the safety plunger spring. And it's a little tiny spring, oops, it's over here, that I will put into the safety plunger, and then I will put it back into the slide, and then we'll go ahead and do the next one. Here's how tiny that spring is. Look how tiny it is. Hope you can see it right there. Oops, and there it is. So let me pull it out of the bag here. And this is something you want to be real careful with because you can lose this one and never find it, except like 2 years later. Okay, there's your safety plunger. Spring goes right on top, and it sits there like that. Now this is real important when you install it, that you actually install it and you install it this way. You want that spring to be nice and upright. So I'll put it up underneath here like so. Once I've got it in, I just want to just work it a little bit, make sure it's got spring pressure. It does. And we don't put any oil in there, okay? A lot of people always wonder about, oh, should I oil that? No, don't, because it doesn't need it. Okay, now here's how we do this. We go and we're going to capture it in here by depressing it, taking our extractor. There's a barrel on the extractor, and there's a hole inside there, and we're going to just drop it straight in and hold it, and then it's going to go ahead and capture the safety plunger, and the safety plunger is going to capture the extractor. It's amazing. It really is. I'm going to take the EDP, the extractor depressor plunger assembly, and I'm going to drop it in. Now remember, it's metal to metal contact. So we want to keep the plastic piece on the outside because it's going to be plastic to plastic up top here with the slide cover plate. So the metal to metal goes in the hole, and I'm just going to drop that in there just to get it out of the way. And now I'm going to approach the firing pin. A lot of people, have some issues with a firing pin, but it's really a pretty simple thing to operate. And here's how we're going to work this. The firing pin has safety cups, or spring cups, should I say. They capture the spring onto the firing pin. If you notice a firing pin, it's got a little neck right here, and those spring cups get captured on the neck. You'll see it as I expose this neck. In order to do that, we're going to go ahead and just take it and spring it and pull the spring down with our hands. And these spring cups may or may not fall off, but they'll be, there they are, they're stuck. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull one off and pull the other one off. And these are called spring cups. And there's a pair, and they match up. And now that I've got the spring depressed, I want to let it go nice and easy and bring it straight off, like so. Just like that. Okay? So now I'm going to replace this factory spring with a 3-pound spring. So let me go get the 3-pounder. And with the kit, it comes with a variety of springs. It's got a 6-pound spring, if you want to be a little heavier. It's got a 4.5 pound, a 4 pound, a 3 pound, which we're going to use, and a 2.5 pound for your competition shooters out there. All right, there's the factory spring. Here's my 3-pound Pyramid Trigger spring. It is a little different color. Basically the same shape, a couple different coils, probably one or two less coils, but lighter than the factory. And this is where trigger pull really comes into play, because you're actually pulling against that spring as you pull the trigger. So the lighter the spring, the lighter your trigger will be. Now here's the hard part, putting the spring back on to the striker. So first of all, I'm going to take the spacer sleeve off of the striker. I'm going to take the new striker and put the spacer sleeve back over top. Now it's very difficult to put this spring on here, because when I put this down, it'll depress. And then it'll be very hard to get the spring on there. So here's the trick. You take your slide, turn it upside down, and using the slide, the channel right there, I'm going to capture the spring, or the safety, excuse me, that's called the spacer sleeve. I'm going to capture the spacer sleeve, and I'm going to use the lug of the firing pin to hold the firing pin up while I depress the spring. So basically, it operates like so. So now, there's my third hand. It's holding up the slide. The slide is actually holding up the whole mechanism, the firing pin and the spacer sleeve and the spring. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the spring cups. So there's only a couple things you have to worry about the spring cups. You just want to make sure that when they come together, that the seam of the two cups coming together, that this seam and this seam, that the seam does not intersect with the end of the spring, so that the spring can somehow work itself in there. That's all. That's the only thing you have to think about. It's easier said than done. So that said, now here's what I've got to do. I've got to preload one of these spring cups in my hand, and I'm right-handed, so I'm going to go ahead and take the spring, I'm going to depress it all the way down, put the spring cup in, kind of get it down into the spring itself, and then I'm going to take the other side and to put it onto the striker as well. And I think I've done it. And now, yes, look at that. So that wasn't that hard, but I've done it hundreds of times. So the first time is going to be tough. The real secret, though, is to make sure you use the slide to capture the lug so you can actually depress that spring with that spacer sleeve. So there is now the 3-pound spring onto our striker. So all we're going to do is drop it in. Again, a lot of people wonder, well, you know, should I oil that? No, do not oil it, because it runs better dry. Inside the slide, by the way, is a piece that a lot of people don't know. It's a channel liner. It's a piece of plastic that is there to allow the spring to operate without metal-to-metal contact. So it's really a plastic sleeve inside the slide. A lot of people don't know that's like the hidden part inside a Glock. If you Cerakote your Glock and you heat it up, you typically will boil that or melt that, and so you have to replace it. And that's, you know, everybody who does Cerakote knows that. But at the end of the day, that's the part that is, like I said, kind of hidden and kind of lost. All right, now, so I've got all the pieces. I've got the safety plunger, new one installed. I've got the 3-pound spring. I've got the new titanium-coated nitride skeletonized striker. To put the slide cover plate back on, we want to preload it a little bit like that. Get my thumb here. Take my punch and push down on the spring pressure of the spacer sleeve that's connected to the firing pin. So as I push it down, I'm going to just thumb this back on, and we'll do two things at one time, or well, one at a time, should I say. There's two things to do. So now I've preloaded it against the spacer sleeve, but I've got to also now push down the EDP, the extractor depressor plunger, the plunger part, with my punch as well. And as I push it down, I thumb it back on, and then I yank it just like that. Boy, I'm getting pretty good at that. That's not as easy as it looks. But, okay, so there it is. Now I've got this whole thing almost done. The last thing I want to do is put in my trigger return spring, or it's actually just called the trigger spring, but it actually is returning. And so a lot of people will ask this question, well, gee, it's a 6-pound spring. Why? Well, it's a little heavier than the Glock factory because it returns the trigger after you've shot it. And because we want it to have a crisper, sharper return, we've included a larger spring. Now, keep in mind, again, when you look at this, it has two open ends. One here and one down here. See if I can get my big fingers out of the way. There's an open end there, there's an open end up top here. When I install it in the trigger, I want to look at it, and it has to have an S shape in a sense that the open end at the top starts over here, coils all the way around, and then it ends over here. That's really important, okay? So let's go ahead now, take this thing apart. Again, I've already done all the pins. I'm just going to pull the trigger housing out. And now I'm going to show you exactly how I do this. This is kind of sometimes a pain, to be honest, but I'll take the trigger bar off. And now I got to take the spring off of here, and this is where it gets a little tough sometimes because it is tight. And it would be easier if I used a tool, but I think I can get this guy here. Come on now. There we go. Got it out. Well, I got it out with my bare hands. Just had to twist it and turn it a little bit. Wasn't quite as elegant as I wanted to be, but it got out. So there's the factory. And there's the aftermarket performance. So again, what I want to make sure I do is when I put this back into that hole, I'm going to put it here like so. So I'm going to make sure that when I end up, if you look at that piece right there, I'm going to stick it in like so. So that when I end up top here, that the spring opens up again in that S shape. I hope you can see that right there. I don't know. Let me see if we can get back in there real close. I'll come a little closer even. That open end needs to be over there on that right side when you're looking at it. Which means when I put it into the hole here in the trigger housing, which is very tiny and going to be very difficult to see, I want to start it with the hole in the opposite way. So I'm going to just hook it in there. Oops. This will be easier if I get closer. There we go. Okay. All right, so I got it hooked there. And then I'll take my trigger bar and using the front hole there, just kind of get that lined up. All right, now here's what we want to make sure we see. So I'm going to point it to you as if you are me. And so that's how we want it to be. We want to make sure that if this piece right here, that the open end is on your right. And then it'll end up over here. The open end will be on the left. Down here at the bottom inside. So that's really important. That's the one thing you really have to make sure with that spring. So now I'm just going to go ahead and twist this back in. And that applies for all the Gen 3 and Gen 4 as well. I mean, the Gen 5 guns don't have that particular spring concept. Okay, there it is. So now we're going to drop it back into. Everything looks good there. Here comes the locking block. Everything looks good there. And we'll start our pins here. Remember, first pin we do is a trigger housing, the locking block pin, because we want to capture the spring of the slide stop underneath that. Okay, and here goes the slide stop itself. And again, you'll see that that spring gets captured underneath that pin that we just installed, that being the locking block pin. Got my holes lined up. I'm going to put my punch in there just to make sure everything looks good. Here goes my trigger pin. Yeah, it's just got a little resistance there on the trigger, I think. There we go. So every once in a while, you'll find that something's not lined up, and then you're going to run into exactly what I'm doing right now. You pound it on a little bit, it just doesn't seem to seat itself, but that's because some of those things migrated around while I was moving it. Let's see if we hear that little click. There it was. And now the trigger housing pin goes in the back here last. Just make sure it's seated. And I'll true that up with my punch. All right, so now, this is the ultimate kit. It's got everything. It's got a new spring, striker spring. It's got the double diamond connector. It's got the skeletonized striker. It's got the titanium coated, titanium nitride coated safety plunger, the safety plunger spring, the whole bit. We're gonna go ahead and reassemble the slide now, put it on here, and let's see what happens with this, this weight. Here comes the barrel first. Next is the guide rod. Now, if this was my gun and I was doing it, I would put a tungsten guide rod in here because it would help reduce recoil significantly. That's a very strong item for us, and that's something you should definitely consider. Okay, well, there's all the factory parts. I'm going to save all those in that box so I have them, and now we're going to go ahead and stick this all together, and let's see how it turns out. Oh, wow. I can feel it. Wow. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I'll start at 4 pounds. So these are 1 pound weights, and the bottom is 2. And I know it's going to go at 4. Just like I thought. I'll go to 3. Now remember, I got the 3 pound spring in it, and I think it's going to be just right there at 3. Yeah, just like I thought. So if I put the ½ pound weight on it, it's going to go just like I thought. So it's between 3 and 3.5. Closer to 3. Yeah. Yep. So it's definitely an improvement. So we started at 5.5 with a factory gun. Put the trigger in, went down to about 4.5, between 4.5 and 4.25, 3/4. Put all the double diamond connector, went down another quarter, down to about 3.5, 4. Put the whole works in it, and we're down between 3 and 3.5. And that's what you're going to get. Now, here's the best part about these triggers, even with the Glock factory trigger. Shoot it 10,000 rounds, and it's going to drop itself down another ½ pound because all the parts just kind of work themselves in. But I hope I've been able to demonstrate to you the ability to install this yourself is very easy. That's the best part about a Glock. The Pyramid Trigger non-adjustable, the Gen 2 version, is probably one of the best things I've ever developed. And I'm super proud of it because I know that it is going to give you a better trigger. It's going to make you a better shooter, just like that. I mean, that easy. The Gen 2 concept, took us about really 6 or 7 months to really refine it because we wanted to make it without adjustment screws. So it's just a drop-in part. We sold a whole bunch of pyramid triggers with adjustment screws, and people love them. The one problem they have is sometimes they'll over-adjust it and it wouldn't work. But we've designed this to be a drop-in part in every Glock, and it's available for all the Glocks. So if you have an existing pyramid trigger and you would like to upgrade to the new Gen 2, we've got a special offer that we're going to offer you through an email. So if you're not on our email list right now, or if you have fallen off our email list, make sure you join it. But we are going to take all those people who were part of the original pyramid trigger and send them a special offer so they can upgrade to Gen 2. If you don't have a pyramid trigger, this is what we're offering now is the Gen 2 exclusively. We've got away with the, it's kind of sunsetted the adjustable trigger because this one is better. It's more robust, it's more reliable, it's easier, it's drop-in, there's no adjustments necessary. And you can see with what we just demonstrated here, from 5.5 down to basically 3.5, 3 3/4, just by installing all these parts. And it's not that hard, and you can do it at your home by yourself. Again, be very safe. Make sure there's no ammo in the room. You will enjoy your Pyramid Trigger. I know I am. I'm shooting it exclusively. I love it. I know you will too. I'm Lenny Magill. This is the GlockStore Performance and Custom Shop. I'm in Nashville right now. And I'll be here because we've moved to Nashville. So we're basically building up this store. It's a fantastic environment. I invite you to come into the Nashville store. Check it out because I've got some great people here, got some great equipment, and the facility is phenomenal. So thank you for watching. Thanks for being part of the GlockStore. And thanks for thinking about the Pyramid 2, the Gen 2 Pyramid Trigger. See you next time.